Hi there again, students. Here we are in, I don't even remember what week this is, but hopefully you are doing well and maybe getting to do some things at home that you don't normally get to do. But for right now, we get to do our grammar. So get out your green grammar book, and we are going to be looking at lesson 75 on page 352. Now, before we start looking at the lesson, I want us to review just a minute the clauses, because we've done clauses before, and we did noun clauses, and we talked about clauses and phrases being different. So I want you to take a second. I'm going to give you about 5 seconds, and on a sheet of paper or a scratch sheet of paper, your has, whatever, I want you to write down the difference between a phrase and a clause. So you can pause the video for a second, and I want to see if you know the difference between a phrase and a clause. So pause and then come back in a second. Okay, so I assume you're back, and I hope that what you wrote down was that a phrase does not have a complete skeleton. It doesn't have a subject and a verb, but a clause does have a complete skeleton. It has a subject and a verb. And if you remember, there were 2 kinds of clauses. So I want you to pause again, and I want you to see if you can remember what the 2 kinds of clauses were. So pause for just a second, write down what you think they were, and describe each one, and then we'll see how close you were. All right, so I'm assuming, since you guys are really smart kids, that you wrote down dependent and independent clauses. Now remember, a dependent clause it needs the rest of the sentence. You are dependent children. You need your parents for money, for entertainment, for food, for transportation. An independent clause can actually stand all by itself as a sentence, doesn't need anything else. So your parents are the independent. So remember all of that? That's going to really help, because as we move into, we're not in the noun chapter anymore, we're in the adjective chapter. And so as we start talking about adjectives, we are going to be talking about dependent clauses only. So, just the general review, what is a clause? It is a group of words that has both a subject and a verb, and there are 2 kinds, dependent and independent. All right, I'm moving to the second of the slides. And so we're going to be talking about just the adjective clause, not the noun clause anymore. So it's dependent clause, and it modifies a noun or pronoun. It usually begins with a relative pronoun, so I'm not going to go or review the relative pronouns, but you should have that help sheet, and you're welcome to get it out and to check and see what relative pronouns are, because that's what an adjective clause is generally going to start with. Now, I want to take a look at a phrase and a sentence with a phrase that can describe a noun, and a sentence with a clause that can describe a noun. So we're going to take a look at, if you hop down here to the bottom of this slide, it says Daniel was a man with a great faith. Forgot to put the period there. But with a great faith is describing man or Daniel, because this is a predicate nominative, or predicate adjective rather, and so it can describe either one of those. So that's a prepositional phrase and an adjective phrase at that. All right, we're going to pop down to hopefully the next one if it lets me. Here we go. Daniel was a man who had a great faith. There's one of those relative pronouns. Now, you know this is a who, which clause. You have seen these for years and years if you've been using IW writing. And so just remember the who, which, and that are generally going to be the starters of these clauses. And so here we have Daniel was a man, still a predicate nominative, and who had a great faith is the clause. Now, if I were to ask you or give you a little quiz and ask you what is the subject and verb of the adjective clause, you would tell me who is the subject, had is the verb, and who had what? Faith. And so that thing needs to be diagrammed in its own little place, and we're going to get there in just a second. The difference is that who is the subject and had is the verb. In the phrase, though, there is not a subject and verb, so don't try to find one. All right, let's hop down to the next slide. We do want to talk about diagramming the adjective clauses. Now, there are several really good examples in your book. We're going to look at those in just a second. But I have provided one that actually it actually gives some titles to some things. It's a long sentence. I didn't even try to figure out what the whole sentence is. Candace volunteers, or Candace, who is by day a dental technician, volunteers at night at a shelter for homeless youth, or something like that. Now, what they do nicely in here is that they point out where the relative pronoun is. So if you take a look at this over here, you see the relative pronoun who is, and then this is a predicate nominative. And so we've talked about this before. We've had who, which clauses before, and we've talked about how they are diagrammed. And so this should not be something new to you. The dashed line runs from the key subject, the main subject, runs from that down to its own little line. The who, which clause is always going to be diagrammed underneath the main skeleton. So don't get into any kind of weird habits of diagramming them however you want to. You used a dash line, and you will draw the line from the word it modifies down to the second diagramming line. So the diagramming is fairly easy. I don't think I had any other examples here. I'll go back up to that one. But let's take a look at the green book. So if you've got your green book out and you look on page 353, at the very bottom of that page, there's another example. People who love the Lord obey his commandments. And so the top line, people obey what? People obey commandments. But then who love the Lord, that's describing the people. And so you see the dashed line coming down. On page 354, there's a couple of different ones. I want to point out the top one. The God whom we serve hears our prayers. Now, this probably deserves a little bit of review. Again, God hears what? Prayers. That's the main skeleton. But then we have the clause that describes God. And it starts off with whom we serve. But this is one of those funny sentences where you kind of have to reverse things a little bit. So if I ask you, what is the subject in that? You would not say whom. You would say we, and the verb is serve. So use a little common sense. If you see whom in there, remember whom is objective case, and it is probably going to go on the last part of the line as a direct object. We serve who or what? We serve whom. So remember, whom cannot be your subject. It's not in the nominative case. It's in the objective case. Put it at the end. And in this case, though, the dotted line does go between God and whom. There's a couple other examples there. I'd like you to take a look at those. But let's take a quick look at the class practice. And we're going to do a few of those. We've got a few minutes here. And it says, read each adjective clause and tell what word it modifies. So I'm going to read the clause. You're going to shout it out loud enough for me to hear, and then I'll give you the answer. But the path of, let me start again. But the path of the just is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. Now, remember I said who, which, or that. So we find that. That shineth more and more unto the perfect day. What is that modifying? Shout it out really loud. And if you said light, you were right. All right, next one. Commonplace decisions, which we make every day, determine the course that our lives will follow. There's 2 in here, so always make sure to look for those. Which we make every day describes what? And I think I can hear you guys all yelling decisions. And the next one, that our lives will follow, is going to modify, of course, it modifies course. All right, the next one, God, who cannot lie, will fulfill every purpose that the Bible gives. We have 2 in here, who cannot lie, and that modifies, correct, it modifies God. And that the Bible promises, or excuse me, that the Bible gives, I kind of gave it away, modifies promises. All right, let's take a look at B. Tell which relative pronouns are correct. We're just going to do a couple of these. And the children had a dog who or which was lively and playful. Well, if you remember the rules, you could go either way with an animal. A lot of people go with which, but you could go with either. But we'll go, the answer book says which. And it's, let's see, the next one, I'm confused. Uncle Jacob, who or whom we visited yesterday, is an invalid. And in this one, we need to choose whom. This is one of those weird ones. Whom we visited yesterday, we visited whom. There it's in the direct object slot. Number 3, we spoke with a man who or which was touring our area. And if you said who and modifying, who is a subject, then you're right. So in those, you have to choose which relative pronoun is correct. And then you have to tell me what it's doing in that clause. And the diagrams on page 355, you may want to try a couple of those, but I do think you are doing some in your homework. You're going to be diagramming a few sentences. I believe that I sent the answers to these or posted them for your parents on Sycamore, so maybe take a check or check with your parents to see if those have been posted. So clauses really should not be a whole new thing. Make sure that you are determining the function of who, which, that, or whom. Remember, if you see whom, it's got to end up on an objective case. So that's all for today on the grammar lesson. Let me know if you have questions. Some of you have been emailing me when you have had questions or if the hasn't been clear. Very good. We may try to do a Jeopardy review game when we come back from Easter break. So look for that on Zoom. So we may try that, and we'll see if we can make that happen. But I hope you guys are doing well and miss you tons, and we will see you on Wednesday. Bye.